Hi everybody, this is Dr. Ty Vincent, making another video about the coronavirus issue. This one specifically about testing for the Covid-19 viral strain. There's a lot of confusion about this, I think, in the general public. The news has been talking about testing a lot lately. Today is April 21st, just to orient you, 2020. And states are talking about reopening based on having enough testing available. And they talk about not having swabs and reagents for one kind of test, and they talk about wondering about the validity and utility of antibody tests. So those are the two general kinds of tests need to be discussed separately. So there's the test for the virus itself, like are you infected? Do you have the virus? Is it present? Is it coming out in your saliva, in your nasal secretions? So that involves a test looking for the virus itself. And that's a PCR test. You might have heard that term. That's polymerase chain reaction. That's where you can take a small amount of genetic material in a sample, like from your nose or your saliva, and then amplify it to where you can see it, like under a microscope, making something really tiny look big. So if you're shedding even just a little bit of the virus, they're looking for the RNA genetic material of the virus, they can amplify it with a PCR type technology and then tell, yes, you have the virus. And it's qualitative, yes or no. Do you have the virus or do you not have the virus? So they can do those tests quickly. They're developing home-based tests for them using saliva samples, trying to see if that is adequate to identify if you have the virus or not. And it's very, very accurate, okay? Because you can tell, yes, that is the genetic material for this virus type versus another. See, there's a very small difference genetically between COVID-19, let's say, and the other 200 kinds of coronaviruses that we know human beings get. The genetic differences are small, okay? Like the difference between a Great Dane and a Chihuahua genetically is very small because they can interbreed, right? They're the same species. They can only interbreed with significant logistical measures. But like these coronaviruses, they're not very different genetically, okay? So you have to find the unique genetic marker in the COVID-19 strain, use that as your DNA probe or your RNA probe in this case, and then amplify that genetic material and go, yes, you have this virus. That's accurate. That's the one where you need certain kinds of swabs to swab the mouth or the nose, and you need certain reagents because it's a complicated test in the laboratory, but it's a simple test in your face. And that's a good test, okay? You can tell very accurately who's got the virus and who doesn't. The antibody tests, to put it shortly, are total garbage, and they always will be. They will not be clinically useful. They will not pan out to be accurate in any way, shape, or form. And here's why. The genetic test for the virus is like having a paternity test. You know, you go on one of those daytime shows and they go, yes, you're the father, with like 99.99% certainty because you're measuring actual DNA sequence. It's very accurate. You can tell one from the other very precisely, okay? The antibody tests are like having a football team run by and then looking at the footprints in the dirt and trying to decide whose footprint was whose. It's horribly inaccurate. And the reason is you're looking at how my immune system made antibodies against this particular virus. And how your immune system makes an antibody against it might not target the same protein exactly. The configuration of our antibodies is going to be a little different. And it's very blurry, very hazy. The term in medical lingo is nonspecific. Whereas the DNA sequence is very specific. You can say this one is exactly the right one from all the others, even if there's a tiny difference. But antibodies are made in a very crude, non-specific manner. Our immune system can only generate so many different variations of an antibody. So if you've had one of the other 200 strains of coronavirus that infect human beings, and guaranteed you have, if you're more than like 6 months old, you've had multiple strains of coronavirus. You will already have antibodies in your body that match up with some type of coronavirus strain in a kind of a crude way, okay? It's not specific, it's very blanketed, and your immune system has to do that to protect you from things more effectively because if it's overly specific, it might miss the mark when something similar shows up, okay? So there's a reason for this. But it's like trying to identify a mugshot 5 feet underwater, okay, instead of right here. It's just blurry, it's hazy, it's very non-specific, imprecise. Antibodies are not very accurate. So if you had one of 20 other types of coronavirus strains in the last 10, 20 years, you may have antibodies circulating in your body that look like COVID-19 antibodies. They will bond to the COVID-19 proteins that they use for the test because they're not that different. They're not different enough from others to discriminate. So what will happen is you'll have a ton of false positives. And you're seeing that in the news right now. People, because the news media rushes to give information to the public, it's often inaccurate because they don't have time to really digest it, fact check it, look deeper. So right now there's all kinds of news coming out going, oh my God, this outbreak is so much worse than we ever thought, right? Because we're finding antibodies against COVID-19 in 80 times more people than we thought. That is crap. That is not accurate at all. Those people just have antibodies to some other kind of coronavirus that they saw. It does not mean that they had COVID-19, not at all. And they really need to stop reporting that. And the medical institutions need to quit reporting this too until they've had enough time to really prove the validation, the validity of this antibody testing process, because it's not going to pan out. I predict through the month of May, you're probably going to stop hearing about the antibody tests in the news, and it's going to fade away. Because I've worked in the medical field for 15 years, and we don't use antibodies against viruses clinically, at all. The only time we use an antibody test to determine immunity is if you had a vaccine against something that we know you've never actually had, like hepatitis B, or chickenpox, or measles. And it only works because there's one kind of measles, and there's one kind of chickenpox virus, varicella zoster virus, and there's one type of polio, and there's one type of rubella. So if we know you didn't get the disease, but you were vaccinated, we can measure the antibody to that thing and go, you have immunity because you have antibodies against this, and we know why we give you a vaccine. That's where that's useful clinically. In the general public, looking at antibody tests against communicable diseases that circulate and that have high variability, lots of strains in the community, this is not clinically useful, and it will not be. The other big problem with antibody tests, the other question circulating is, does it demonstrate that you have immunity? And absolutely no, it does not. It will not demonstrate that you have immunity. One, because you can't be certain that the antibody is actually going to cover COVID-19. And the other is kind of a scary phenomenon called antibody-dependent enhancement, which I'll talk more about in a video I'm going to make about vaccines. I'm going to make a separate video discussing the concept of making a vaccine for COVID-19, which, spoiler alert, isn't going to work. And is probably going to cause more harm than good, to tell you the truth. But there's something called antibody-dependent enhancement, where having antibodies against a certain virus can, in some cases, make it more likely to infect you. It's like a doorman who opens the door to your cells and says, come on in, yeah, go right ahead. It can enhance replication, and it can enhance infectivity. So having antibodies in no way, shape, or form conveys immunity to certain viruses. So there you go. Anyway. The test for the virus, that is what we need. We need more of that. We need to be able to have that available in the mass public so that we can tell who's got the virus and send those people home. That's actually really going to be important. But the antibody tests, you're going to stop hearing about that because that is never going to work. Sorry. All right, stay tuned. Thanks.